Should a child ever be kicked out of preschool? Despite bans, in Houston, Emmett Tsai's rambunctious 3-year-old son was kicked out of 4 preschools near his home, including one that expelled him after just a few hours for jumping around and ignoring safety precautions. In New York City, Deborah Sinclair said she felt lost and alone when a few incidents of kicking and biting got her son forced out of a preschool in Queens. And in Chicago, Mina Marine said her 3-year-old son was distressed when one preschool, then another, pushed him out for biting, shoving and, in one case, hitting another child with a rolling pin. There's nothing new about tiny troublemakers being pushed out of preschools. A 2016, but Tsai, Sinclair, and Marine all live in cities or states that have taken steps to reduce suspensions and expulsions, in response to research showing that young children who are booted from preschool face a slow that their sons work. Even in states that have passed laws largely banning the practice, advocates say, many teachers lack the additional training and support they need to prevent dangerous behaviors and to keep all children safe in school. When Tsai, Sinclair, and Marine's children were expelled, they were attending schools that were outside the reach of city and state expulsion bans, or schools that were still figuring out how to comply with new regulations. The result was that the private program her son attended when he was 3 wasn't subject to New York City's preschool expulsion ban because it didn't take city money. When the school kicked him, preschoolers are 3 times more likely than older children to be kicked out of school, found. The crisis is an expulsion can also throw parents' lives into turmoil, forcing them to miss work as they search for resources to support a struggling child. In 2014, President Barack Obama's Health and Education secretaries rang the alarm over preschool suspensions and expulsions with that strongly. More than 24 states and cities heeded that call, have largely banned. The new laws aren't insisting that schools hang on to children who are hurting themselves or their classmates. The idea is but while these developments have led to increased awareness of the issue, and while some states have created promising programs, advocates and researchers say that, in much of the country, little has changed. Most of the new laws banning or restricting suspension or expulsion apply only to preschools that are. That's despite even in Illinois, where one of the nation's most far-reaching laws aimed at curtailing preschool expulsion applies to both government-funded programs and to those that are merely licensed by the state, the law has been slow to have the impact advocates anticipated. The law went into effect, found that more than 1 in 3 Illinois preschools contacted by researchers had expelled at least one child since the law took effect. Some schools, the law requires schools to work with a child to improve his behavior before kicking him out. If that doesn't work, many schools are still trying to figure out what that means in practice, Zinsser said. Advocates hope that the law's implementation will be clarified during the rulemaking process and that the problems identified in Zinsser's study will lead to schools getting more support from the state. After Emmett Tsai's son, who turned 4 this week, is a happy and affectionate boy who likes to run and dance, she said, but a speech delay and hyperactivity have contributed to challenging behaviors. When his energy level got him into trouble, he was attending schools, 3 of them affiliated with churches and a 4th on the campus of a local college, that weren't subject to Texas laws banning the or of young children. Even schools that are 2 of her son's schools did not respond to requests for comment. The 2 that did said, Many early childhood educators have little more than a high school education. Few have had special. In Chicago, Marine's son, now 4, could have been protected by the Illinois law. But she didn't know that at the time, and she thinks the schools her son attended last year relied on language in the law that allows schools to a child out of a classroom, since they told her that her son could stay until she found something else. One of Marion's son's schools declined to comment. The other did not. Catherine Conklin, who runs a Chicago organization called Tuesday's Child that helps families address behavioral issues, trains teachers, and operates a preschool, said her organization has seen a steady flow of Chicago parents like Marion coming in with reports of their preschoolers being suspended or expelled. What's new is that expulsions are taking longer since the law passed, she said. In a different era, a child getting expelled from preschool might not have attracted much concern. Unlike elementary school, preschool attendance isn't mandatory. The activities but early childhood development experts say that pushing these children out of classrooms comes at a cost. Children who have been expelled may also struggle in their next school. Sinclair said her son, Macari, has abandonment issues that have been exacerbated by being told without warning that he'd have to change schools. In Erie, Colorado, April Tardy said her son, Zachary, 5, was traumatized when he was pushed out of a preschool near his home for shoving and tackling other children. Tardy said she told the school about her efforts to treat Zachary's sensory processing disorder. But a week before, now, months later, attending a small summer camp, he is terrified of getting into trouble again, she said. Colorado restricting expulsions for young children, but it doesn't go into effect until. With the passage of new state and local laws, it's possible that the rate of preschool suspension and expulsion has begun to fall. But changes to the National Survey of Children's Health, a federal study, last asked parents about preschool discipline in 2016 but no longer includes the question. A spokesman for the other data that could shed light on the problem from the Education Department's Office of Civil Rights has been collected from school districts but has not been published as it was in the past, under Obama, said Walter Gilliam, a Yale University professor of child psychiatry and psychology, who published the first major on preschool expulsion in 2005. Still, a handful of states, including California, Connecticut, and Ohio, have begun providing effective support to preschools, such as who can train teachers to work with challenging students. In Arkansas, in states without these resources, though, Gilliam is concerned that schools could find their way around bans to continue removing students, based on anecdotes he's heard from parents. That could mean Gilliam has called on more states to fund mental health consultants. She Willis said she would have welcomed that kind of support when her 2-year-old son was thrown out of a church preschool in Madison, Mississippi, last year for biting. Instead, in a state that has no regulations on suspension and expulsion for preschoolers, she was told that her child needed to leave.
Raindrop, drop top smoking, no cooking the hot pot. Fucking on your bitch, yeah, that. Looking up, open the park,